Hello and good tidings. My name is Stacey Wakali. I'm an interior designer and architect trained at the University of Nairobi. I have been in the design world for about 12 years now and running my own company for most of that time. Welcome to the Build List, a space where we get to talk honestly about design and architecture with a special focus on African and traditional design and materials. Here, we'll dig into questions like why do so many Kenyan spaces end up looking the same? That is the Kenya uniform. What's really going on with Kikuyu Gothic and all these similar design choices? Why do people choose certain designs, finishes, and layouts over others? Each episode will run anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the style. Sometimes it will be just you and me in a solo episode like this, and other times we'll invite guests from around the industry. We'll release one episode every week, and once in a while, I'll throw in a random, slightly weird topic episode just to keep things interesting and show you that design can also be playful. If you want to see the spaces and projects we talk about, you can follow us on Instagram at lighthouse underscore design underscore limited. That's where we'll post photos of projects and we mention here as well as other work we've done or are currently working on. Today, we're starting at the very beginning because before we argue about tiles, paint colors, or sofas, we need a shared language. So, in this first episode, we're going to answer a few simple but important questions. What is interior design? What is interior architecture? What's the difference between the two? And what do we actually study in this field beyond what you see on Pinterest or Instagram? Let's start with the basics. When people hear interior design, they often think of paint colors, cushions, and pretty decor. Interior design includes all of these, but it is much deeper. Interior design is the art and science of shaping the inside of a building so that it actually works for the people using it. It's about making spaces functional so you can move easily, cook, work, and host without fighting the room. It makes it safe so finishes, lighting, and circulation don't put you at risk, and aesthetically pleasing so you that actually enjoy being there. It goes far beyond does this look cute and into questions like how does light enter this space throughout the day? Where do people actually naturally walk? Can a person with mobility challenges use the space comfortably? How does this room make you feel after sitting in it for an hour? Think of a typical Kenyan apartment living room. The TV, the sofa, the dining table, that balcony door. A good interior designer is thinking about how you move from the door to the sofa, whether the TV glare is too strong from the window, whether the dining chairs are too cramped, and how all of that fits into your lifestyle. Now, let's talk about interior architecture. Interior architecture is about the bones and structure of the interior space. It blends architecture and interior design by focusing on things like walls and partitions, the layout and flow of rooms, structural elements, building systems like lighting, ventilation, and services. An interior architect asks questions like, should this wall even be here? What happens if we open up this kitchen to the living room? How do we bring in more natural light? Where should the staircase sit so that it's both safe and beautiful? So, while an interior designer might be thinking about how to furnish your living and dining area, an interior architect might be the one saying, let's remove this wall so that the space feels bigger and functions better for the way you live. In renovations, especially, interior architecture can mean shaping the space itself, moving or adding walls, changing door positions, rethinking circulation routes, so that later, when we decorate, we're not just putting lipstick on a bad project or a bad layout. Here's a simple way to separate them in your mind. Interior architecture looks at the structure and layout of the space, which is the skeleton. Interior design looks at how that finished space looks and feels once people are actually living and working in it, basically the skin and the clothing. An interior architect might move or design a wall. An interior designer decides what happens on and around that wall, the color, the lighting, the furniture, the art. In reality, especially in Kenya, these roles often overlap. Many of us are trained in both. We move back and forth between shaping the space and styling it. But it's still helpful to know that there's a technical, structural side and a more atmospheric side to what we do. What do interior architects and interior designers actually study in school and on the job? It's not just matching pillows to curtains. There are several key factors and sectors that we focus on. I'll walk through a few of them and give you a quick feel for each one. Space planning is the study of how people relate to spaces. There's a simple rule to follow: form follows function. That means we don't start by asking what shape of sofa is trending. We start with, what do you need this room to do? So, for example, a bed sitter in Nairobi. Do you need a workspace? Do you need a sleeping area, a place to host one or two friends? Space planning is how we divide that one room so that it doesn't feel like a chaotic storage unit. In a three-bedroom house in Syokimau, how do you place living, dining, and circulation so that people aren't bumping into furniture every time someone tries to go into the kitchen? Good space planning can make a small space feel generous, and bad space planning can make a big house feel cramped. Let's move on to ergonomics. Ergonomics is a study of how people physically interact with objects and spaces. It's what tells us how high a kitchen counter should be so that your back doesn't hurt, how deep a sofa seat should be so that your feet are not dangling and they actually touch the floor, how wide a staircase step should be so that you don't feel like you're climbing a ladder. This is often between the difference between a 7K chair and a 20K chair. They can look similar in a photo, but when you sit down for an hour, one supports your body properly and the other has you planning an emergency chiropractor visit. Color psychology is another factor. This looks at how colors affect the human emotions and behavior. We think about questions like, what colors help you relax in a bedroom? What colors keep you alert in an office? How does a bright red wall in a tiny room make you feel versus a calm, muted tone? In Kenyan homes, you often see a mix of, some strong colors, some very muted colors. Sometimes they work, sometimes it overwhelms the space. Color psychology helps us to use color intentionally, not just because a paint brand had a sale that weekend, or because this is the style that is trending, this is the color that is trending. Moving on to history of art and design. History of art might sound very far from your living room, but it's actually very practical. It teaches us how social, political, and economic conditions influence design and art. For example, why certain periods loved heavy ornate furniture, why minimalism became popular in other times, and how colonial history has shaped many African interiors and public buildings, which is a very strong theme actually throughout this podcast. When we understand that history, we can make better choices today, whether we're embracing a style, rejecting it, or remixing it with local traditions. We also study materials, both raw and finished. Even though it's not always a unit on its own, material study shows up everywhere. Which material works best for floors in a high traffic corridor? Where wood is appropriate and where moisture will destroy it? How to combine stone, metal, glass, and fabric so that they age well and are easy to maintain. This is how we avoid things like using the wrong type of wood in a wet bathroom or picking a beautiful but slippery tile in a public staircase. Lighting design is another big piece. We think about how many lights do you actually need in a room, where to place them so you're not working in your shadow, what color temperature, which is warm versus cool light, is right for different spaces. You've probably been in a restaurant where the food looks dull because the lighting is too cold, or a bedroom that feels like an office because the light is harsh and white and you struggle to fall asleep. A designer uses lighting to shape mood as much as to let you see. Then there's exhibition and display. This is where we learn how to create eye-catching displays for shop fronts, pop-up stalls, shelving, restaurants, and cafe interiors. In Kenya, think about those shop fronts that pull you in immediately. Not because they're expensive, but because the display is thoughtful. And that's exhibition and display at work. Landscape architecture focuses on your outdoor spaces. We look at how to map out gardens and courtyards, how to use levels, paths, and plants to guide people, which materials to use for paving so that they're safe and durable. It's not just plant some flowers at the gate, it's about creating an outdoor experience that feels intentional from the driveway to the backyard. And finally, furniture design. Here we'll look at which materials to use for different types of furniture, the right dimensions for comfort and support, how a piece will be used day to day. Again, this ties back to ergonomics and space planning. The same sofa will have behave very differently in a small studio versus a large open plan house. So to quickly recap, interior design is about shaping interiors so they're functional, safe, and beautiful, not just decorated. Interior architecture looks at the structure and layout of those interiors, the walls, the flow, the bones of the space. And behind both of these are all the things that we study: space planning, ergonomics, color psychology, history of art, materials, lighting, exhibition and display, landscape, and furniture. All of this is what allows us to take an empty shell and turn it into a space that actually supports your life. In the future episodes of the Built List, we'll take these ideas and connect them into what we see in everyday Kenya. From Kenya uniform spaces and apartments to Kikuyu Gothic homes and all the quirky, creative, and sometimes confusing choices we've made as a people. In the next episode, we'll start unpacking those Kenyan design habits in more details and why we copy certain looks, what drives those choices, and how we can be more intentional with our spaces. If you'd like to see the kind of projects that we're talking about, or you're just curious about what we're working on, you can follow us on Instagram at lighthouse_designs_limited. Thank you so much for listening to this first episode of The Built List. I am Stacey Mukali, and I'll see you on the next one. Remember, nobody has a monopoly on design and stylistic choices. There's always more to learn.